Hi, this is Chicano Darks, and welcome back to my channel.
Hans Asperger had a much broader idea of autism. He included children with milder challenges, who we might today call Aspergers. And he is credited with the idea that we have of an autism spectrum. Now, I'm here today to present how he developed his diagnosis in the Third Reich. He had a heroic reputation as a resistor of Nazism. On his Wikipedia page, when I began my research, it said that he risked his life to protect children from the Nazi killing program that killed children considered to be disabled. Asperger supposedly emphasized the special abilities of children to stress their value to the state. And according to this theory, he used the autism diagnosis as a psychiatric Schindler's List to protect them. So I went off to Vienna really excited to tell this heroic story, and my agent was all excited. And what I found in the very first file I looked in Vienna was not a heroic story, but an absolute horror story with far-reaching implications for how we talk about autism and Asperger today.
Hi, jumping in real quick right now while I'm editing, because I forgot to say that in the clip that I just added, the one who is presenting is Edith Schaefer, and she actually went to Vienna to study the documents that were found of Asperger and the role that he played in the Nazi regime. And she actually ended up writing a book called Asperger's Children: The Origin of Autism in Nazi Vienna. In case some of you guys didn't know, this past month, April, is actually Autism Awareness Month. And in order to honor that, I'm going to be talking about Asperger syndrome, also known as ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder. Asperger syndrome was actually named after Hans Asperger. And who was Hans Asperger? Previously, it was thought that Hans Asperger was devoted to protecting the autism community and protecting them from the Nazi regime. But there are documents that have come out and that have been found that very much portray a different story. These documents show the real role that he played in the Nazi regime. The history of Nazi doctors performing forced sterilization on kids and adults with various disabilities is very well known, but less well known is the role that Hans Asperger played in that. Asperger largely constructed an image of himself as an opponent of the Nazi regime, but with documents resurfacing by Herwig Schizek, it has proven otherwise, and it shows a different narrative of him and actually been playing a role in the Nazi regime. Nazi ideologies shaped the research around Asperger syndrome. Not only that, but Hans was complicit and assisted in the Nazi euthanasia of children. Despite claims of the contrary, these documents were not destroyed during the war, despite a big gap between 1945 and 1969. These files go as far back as 1912, by the way. And today, they're being kept in the municipal and provincial archives of Vienna. These pertain to the children who were admitted as inpatients. The much larger number of kids examined as outpatients is not there. It's been lost, with the exception of years of 1938 to 1944. Although Hans did not join a Nazi group, he had several ties with prominent Nazi figures like Hamburger. I don't know if you pronounce the H, Hamburger, or not, or Amberger. I told you guys I'm gonna be butchering these names. Jekilius and Erwin Rizak. I am so sorry, any Germans out there. If you guys are watching this, I'm butchering the fuck out of this. Whoops. He shared considerable ideological common ground with Amberger, who was really high in the Nazi stuff. He had a lot of power, and which allowed him to blend in very easily with the Nazis.
Hamburger trusted him. Hamburger, who ran the hospital, said doctors should be downright saturated with National Socialist principles, and he kept Asperger director of his own clinic. For example, he also had Asperger in the leadership of one of his prized programs, which I just think is worth mentioning, motorized mother advising, which sounds great. These guys drove out to rural areas in this health car, and doctors and nurses would dispense mothers medical advice. And this sounds great, right? But they also acted as the eyes and ears of the Nazi regime. And they would index children who they thought were disabled or genetically tainted and kept records that would later be put to use for their extermination. And records show that about 22% of children who were killed in Vienna came from these regions that Asperger directed with this motorized mother advising. In the fall of 1940, Asperger began to work as a consultant for Vienna's public health office, which sounds like a benign office, but it was actually the center of racial hygiene measures in the city. This office coordinated forced sterilizations, deportations to concentration camps, and the killings of people continued to be disabled.
Asperger and his colleagues separated kids who they believed to be curable, and these were the ones who they believed had any value. And by separating them from their families and strengthening their ties to the community, they believed that these children could be saved. The children who were regarded as lost or so badly damaged that they wouldn't be able to fulfill a role in the Nazi society were undesirable. Initially, they were institutionalized, but beginning 1939, the start of the T4 program, they were being euthanized or put to death. Asperger claimed to have shielded and protected his patients from the Nazi regime, but patient records actually show that he sent patients to Am Spiegelgrund. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but it is a clinic in Vienna where these kids were put to death most of the time. This clinic participated in the Third Reich euthanasia program, which sought to kill anyone who was deemed a burden. Life at Am Spiegelgrund was harsh. For example, you were physically punished for not clipping your nails or not having your bed done correctly. Like, you were forced to do push-ups and stuff like that. The nurses could withhold your meals, and some survivors reported constantly being hungry, and if you ever threw up, you were forced to eat it up. On June 27, 1941, Erta Schreiber was examined by Hans. The 2-year-old had fallen ill from encephalitis and diphtheria a couple months earlier. And right now I'm going to read right off of this because there's a quote that I want to make sure I get right. Hans noted, serious personality disorder, major motoric retardation. Sorry about the word, but that's what he put. Erratic idiocracy, seizures. The child must be an unbearable burden for her mother who has 5 healthy children to care for. Permanent placement in Am Spiegelgrund appears absolutely necessary. Only 4 days later, Erta Schreiber was admitted to Am Spiegelgrund as a 2-year-old. 1 month later, the senior medical at Am Spiegelgrund, by the way, Hans Asperger had really close connections with him. Erwin Jekilius, I'm so sorry, I'm going to be butchering a lot of these names, reported that Erta suffered from idiocy, not wanting any interaction with her surroundings. And it's actually really sad, but Erta's mom actually sent a letter pretty much saying that she'd be okay with her dying, saying like, pretty much if she can't be cured, then what is best for her is to be put down, which is really sad. And apparently it was kind of like a common occurrence. This was not a one-time thing. Apparently many parents sent in letters like that. 1 month later, a day after Erta's 3rd birthday, she was actually put to death and it was registered down as pneumonia. Erta was one of the 789 children who were put down at Am Spiegelgrund alone, just Am Spiegelgrund. So you can imagine how many more clinics like this were out there that were doing this and were putting disabled children down. The most common method to euthanize the kids was to administer Bitrin, which was usually mixed in with cocoa. This strong hypnotic, which is now used to induce narcosis in people, by the way, caused many children to die quickly. Those who survived were given multiple dosages, were denied food, and most of them died from either starvation or an infection like pneumonia. This following belief does not pertain to autism, but I think it's still really important to cover what he believes and what kind of information he spread, since, ASD level 1 is named after him. I think it's really important to know the kind of person that we're giving credit to. His opposition of psychoanalysis and the role of trauma and development and psychopathology in children is very evident in his explanation of sexual abuse in children. He claimed that children that were exposed to abuse needed to have an innate disposition and shamelessness that attracted these type of instances, and that children with a healthy personality would be able to get over these type of traumas. The case of 15-year-old Edith perfectly illustrates and shows his views on sexual abuse of children. Edith was admitted to, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna write it down here, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that word, in 1941 because she admitted to being sexually assaulted by a 40-year-old man. In this report, Asperger called her underdeveloped in the regards of character and intellect. He deplored that she lacked moral sense and that she showed no remorse over the incident. I'm sorry, but how is she supposed to show remorse? She's the victim in the situation. He recommended placing her in permanent welfare care, not just because of her severe sexual depravity, but because of the supposed moral danger that she posed to society. Asperger's files describe children with disabilities and psychiatric issues at times with far more negative terms than his colleagues. For example, Spiegelgruppe physicians described this boy named Leo as very well developed in every respect. Asperger, on the other hand, defined him as very difficult, psychopathic boy of a kind of which is not frequently among small children. After the war, Asperger returned to Vienna University Clinic. He was allowed to keep the academic merit that he achieved in the Nazi years, and in 1962, he was appointed as chief medical officer in a children's clinic in Vienna. Senior medical officer Henrik Gross, I'm sorry for butchering that again, I'm so sorry, kept the brains of about 400 children in jars and used them for research purposes well into the 1980s. Since Asperger's symptoms are indistinguishable from the ones of autism, it no longer became an actual diagnosis, and it is now all considered ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. Asperger's is just people with autism who the Nazi regime considered worthy and high functionable enough to serve a purpose to the Nazi regime. Functioning labels go hand in hand with Asperger's syndrome, so you can't say that you don't support the work of Asperger and use function labels. It's literally the point that Asperger was trying to make. Not only that, but I view functioning labels as very dehumanizing, because what do you mean functioning? Like, to me it kind of just sounds like a machine that they don't function correctly. I don't know, those terms that you use for a machine, using it for a person, very dehumanizing. And now with RFK spreading a very similar rhetoric that was being spread about autism back then, very scary. You got to stay vigilant. Got to pay attention to what's going on, because again, like in lots of these videos that I've said, history tends to repeat itself, and sadly in almost every single one of these videos that I've made of history, sadly all of them are very relevant right now, because there's a lot of shit that I see going on that was happening back then. And when you start doing research and history and looking back at all that, you can really see these patterns happening over and over again. So guys, stay vigilant, keep your eyes open, make sure all these warning signs that you know them, and just stay educated, guys, because really we can't let shit like this happen again. And anyways, that was today's chapter of Missing History. Alright guys, thank you guys, and have a good day.
De quejas toparás con un mar de secretarias pendejas, el siguiente en la fila, y así te la pelas, pero el bono sexenal no